Hey, it's Shane with GotRom.com. I want to talk to you today about yoga poses that might hurt your hips. Now, I work with a lot of people who have hip impingement or FAI or just tight hips in general, and yoga has a lot of stretches for the hips. So there's all kinds of, depending on what's going on with you, all kinds of different positions that might irritate you. But from what I hear from people emailing me, the three most common poses that might hurt your hips in yoga that you either need to modify or learn how to get into better are pigeon pose, hip flexor stretches, and the warrior poses. So let me show you what I mean. So if you're dealing with tight hips or hip impingement and the yoga teacher has you just go from, like downward dog right into pigeon pose, you might not be ready for that and your hip isn't fully centered in the socket. And so you go into this and you just get an impingement feeling on the front of the hip, and the yoga teacher is saying, oh, you should feel it back in your glutes, and you're like, no, I just am getting this pain right here. So one thing you can try is, instead of just going and kind of bringing the leg up like this, you might want to try putting it on the ground in front of you like this, blocked by the knee, squaring yourself up to the front, reaching underneath and twisting your thigh out, sticking your butt back and seeing if you just get a stretch there. If you can get a stretch there and you're ready to move deeper, you could hold your foot and keep downward pressure through this knee and scoot back just a little bit. I find it helpful to lift up. You'll get less impingement if there's more space between here and here. So maybe your pigeon pose is here for now. Or maybe you have to do it on an elevated table at home. But if you're in your yoga class, see if you can get in this position. Sometimes in the beginning when I had my hip impingement stuff going on years ago, I always needed to kind of rotate this thigh with this hand to kind of clear that impingement feeling, and then I could get more of a glute stretch. So use your hand to push on this hip and rotate it out. From this angle, it looks like this. I'm rotating it out, and then I can sit back and lean forward into the pose a little bit better. If just changing the way you're getting into the pose doesn't take away your impingement feeling, there may be some tissue work that you need to do on your adductors and on your hip flexors and on your glutes that will, over time, allow you to get into this pose a little bit easier. So know that it's a process. For me, I couldn't do any pigeon pose stuff in the beginning, but through the tissue work, through learning how to use my hand and get into a better position, I found that I could slowly get into it better over time. And I needed to modify it in the beginning. I needed to use a table. So that's pigeon pose. The other thing that people complain about is hip flexor stretches, where they go here and they stretch their hip flexors. Now, I just did the major error, which is to not crunch and contract my glutes and then come into this stretch. If I'm relaxed, arched in my back, and just come forward, I'm gonna stretch the anterior capsule in a negative way. I might overstretch my back and it's just painful. My glutes are kind of inactive right now. They're not turned on, which allows my femur to drift forward in the socket and get some kind of anterior femoral glide pain, which I've experienced on my right hip. And a lot of people complain about this kind of like, is that what a hip flexor stretch is supposed to feel like? Because it doesn't feel like that on my other leg. So if the hip flexor stretch doesn't feel like a stretch of the muscle, and it feels like a sharp sensation in hip flexor stretches, a couple things you want to try are ribs down, squeeze your butt, then go into it, and only go as far as it feels like a muscular stretch, not a, sharp, painful, pinchy, capsular-like stretch. Just something different, something that doesn't feel good. Trust your body's intuition about that. So if the rib positioning and the glute is one thing to try, the other thing to try is standing versions, because when you go to a standing version, you automatically kind of have to contract your glutes a little bit more, and I find that it feels like a better position for my hip in the socket. You can also try leaning forward more and then dropping the hip. You can try side bending. So you don't always have to go with the kneeling variation. Sometimes standing variations are a little bit better, especially if you really crunch and tuck. Sometimes I'll even try to look underneath myself, see my back foot, and then drop my hip. And that feels like it aligns my pelvis in a helpful way. So the last one that people complain about is the warrior positions in yoga. So typically they mean warrior 1 or warrior 2, so here or here. But the real problem with this position for people with tight hips or hip impingement is that this is hip abduction, and they're missing that a lot. They can't have the leg just kind of come out to the side. So that's what's happening in this position, and often they can't turn like this. They have to kind of stay squared up this way, and the teachers want them to kind of be more forward. So if you're missing this abduction of the hip, what you can do is not go so deep into the pose. Don't look around the room and see these bendy, flexible yogis who are super deep into the pose. Go where your body can go, where you still feel a adductor stretch on the inside. A lot of people can't even feel a stretch on the inside because they're getting so pinched and impinged on the outside. So if you can't even get into this pose, the thing that helped me the most was simply doing tissue work on those adductor muscles. So I've got a lot of videos on this channel about how to do tissue work with the adductors in the fire hydrant position, how to use a kettlebell. You can go to a manual therapist, and I'll link to some of those videos, but don't force it. Don't think that you're supposed to feel a outer hip impinging feeling during the warrior poses. It's supposed to be kind of on the adductors. And learn how to do tissue work on your adductors. Even do some work on your IT band and the rest of your hip. All of that will add up to being able to do warrior deeper over time. It took months for me to get into a comfortable warrior, so it might take some time for you too. But those are the 3 poses that I think are kind of most precarious if you're doing yoga. So just be careful, don't force it. It should be comfortable when you're stretching, when you're doing asanas. So don't force it. Learn how to do tissue work to help, learn how to move a little bit better, and I think yoga can be a great help if you have hip impingement, so give it a shot.
Yeah, be cool, just move with the